Hello. Just waiting for a few more people to join. Let's There he is. The man, the myth, the legend, Uncle.
What's going on? What's going on?
Nothing. What's up with you?
Can't complain, man. On time today.
I'm the one who's late today.
Oh yeah.
Just gonna wait for a few more people to join. We're talking about the fall of the Axumite Empire. Here's some interesting stuff. Hello, everybody. Hello, Nunu. Hello, Febu. Yeah, I got a haircut today.
Yeah.
Got the beard lined up, I couldn't deal with the Rona cut anymore.
Yeah, no, things are open up now, so
hmm
we got the chance to go to the barber and all of that.
Exactly. I don't know about the beard. Oh, the beard's okay.
Uh, But then we come together like muscle.
Is that a thing? Is growing out a beard a Tagalog thing?
Oh yeah, and Abarahan Halyom, like they would keep their beard in their hair, so they had the afros and the beard going on,
hmm
which was I think the source of the reason why they would call us Kamalam, because they
Oh,
wouldn't
yeah.
shower necessarily, right? Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, if you're
So
out in, the bushes, you don't
yeah.
have access to a shower.
Oh, none of that, man. You're lucky if you got
hmm
to drink water. So,
Yep. hmm Some of the stories. One day we got to have a Tariq time with Tagada Layan,
yeah, no,
you
we need
know?
we definitely got to interview a
hmm
couple of them.
hmm Okay, we got some people. I think that's enough. We can start. So, guys, today we are talking about the fall of the Axumite Empire. Last episode, we talked about Axum's trade relations. We talked about, I think, Saint Yard, right?
Yeah, yeah.
We talked about the Nine Saints. We talked about, the
Mm.
territorial expansion of the Axumite Empire, all that jazz. So today I'm just going to read a little bit of like a little thing I have prepared. So people um, understanding a kingdom is essential to understanding its potential causes of collapse. So the kingdom of Axum, also called the Axumite Empire, was certainly a very powerful kingdom, and it was centered in northern Ethiopia and Eritrea. It was occupied by agrarian people for a long time, so people who farmed and also people who engaged in herding different kinds of animals, mostly cattle. Um, and it condensed into a confederation of kingdoms. So let's see, let me just scroll down. This is from my previous stuff. Okay, so much of the difficulty in understanding Axum's collapse comes from the lack of primary sources. So we talked about this last time. As one historian put it, they are meager in the extreme. Axum did have a writing system, but much of its writing lent itself to brief inscriptions rather than detailed histories and records. So most of what we can tell from these inscriptions is that Axum was strongly hierarchical, was likely highly urbanized, and that priests and traders were valued very much so. There are exceptions such as the Izana stone and a few other longer inscriptions which records King Izana the first conversion of Axumite or Axumite. Oh, sorry, I don't know what I wrote there. Um, but most of these inscriptions are propagandistic celebrations of military victories, and little is known about daily life, the exact history, or the role of different people. So women, as such, determining a precise timeline is difficult. Generally, there are three sources of primary information, so oral Ethiopian histories, mentions in classical accounts, and archaeological excavations. So, as for classical sources, one of them is the Hadith, an account of the life of Prophet Muhammad, which covers some of the history of Aksum's reign from 615 to roughly 630 AD. This account is a little bit, suspect from a historical point of view because um, it's a religious text, so it may not be the most accurate. Another one we have is something called the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea or the Red Sea, written by a Greek scholar. but it's very, very vague when it comes to talking about Axum. It doesn't really have, too much detail in it. And from what we know from oral histories, they can provide windows into or different periods, but they're not super reliable. So the most valuable source we have is generally considered not to come from writing, but from artifacts, and more specifically from coins, as we spoke about as well last time. Axum minted its own coins, the first African state to do so, and they were usually inscribed with the face of the current king, 2 ears of corn, not necessarily corn, some sort of usually
Wheat,
barley,
yeah.
wheat, yeah. The king's name and title, and a phrase, sometimes peace to the people. Of the 34 or so known Axumite kings, 26 are recognized on coins. So this system of universal currency was part of what made Axum so successful, and its changing state. Minting was altered with each new king, and the addition of Christian symbols as the kingdom converted shows us how Axum was doing throughout its history and throughout its decline. In earlier eras of Axum, coins were more plentiful, making them easier to date, but as time went on, the quantity seems to have declined, and most of the latter specimens were single surviving specimens of issues or a bewildering array of mutually exclusive factors to take into account. See, I worked 6 days last week, so, my notes are a little bit. But from what we know, the coins of the later Axumite kings appear to have been much less finely made than earlier coins and have a much lower gold content, going from 97% to 54%. So they were also less widely distributed in the later era, suggesting a loss in control over vassal states and reduced trade. Around this time, between 500 and 600 AD, the mottos on the coins changed from phrases praising royals and religion to ones that begged for mercy and peace from God. All of this evidences a sort of decline in Axum's power. By late 600 or early 700 AD, the minting of coins ceased entirely. Sometime before 750 AD, the capital was largely abandoned in a strangely abrupt fashion and replaced by a new one further south called Kubar, which we don't know exactly where it's located. There's different speculation. All we know is Axum was on its way out. So I think we kind of talked about this before maybe, and I think the general sort of overview did the first episode, but there are a lot of theories as to how Axum's collapse began and what the proverbial final nail was. But there's multiple factors. So I'm just going to go over, I think, like 3 or 4. And these were probably all interrelated, okay? So the first one is overextension. We covered this last time. Around 600 or 700 AD, no, I think 500, an Axumite king named Khalid launched an invasion of Yemen. This war was initially successful, but it was very, very expensive and seems to have been unpopular. We also know that one of King Khalid's generals defected, right? Abraha. So we know that it was an expensive war, an unpopular war, and after they conquered it, one of the generals defected and took the land for himself, so they didn't receive any tribute or anything for it. So that's a huge unsuccessful war effort that was made at that time. And it's also interesting to note that inscriptions for kings after Khalid are increasingly scarce and their chronology is increasingly obscure. The second one we have is climate and overuse. This one gets talked a lot about a lot, and it's quite important. One of the most cited reasons for Axum's decline is climate. Around 500 AD, a rapid increase in aridity took place in modern-day Ethiopia's northern highlands, meaning the land became a little bit more dry, right? This could have devastated crops, of which Axum grew a multitude, including wheat, barley, teff, sorghum, and many more. As Axum continued to grow, the number of crops growing increased, exhausting the soil. Additionally, Axum was heavily reliant on wood charcoal, which would have led to mass deforestation, further degrading the environment. Later, around 750 AD, large floods in Egypt were recorded, and since the flooding of the Nile would have depended on the rains around Axum, the former capital, this might have meant the devastation of Axum's crops due to erosion of soil, which was already damaged by earlier dry periods. Evacuation of Axum showed possible evidence of this erosion, which may have been a factor in moving the capital if the switch happened that late. One ancient writer also referred to a multitude of locusts and the damage which they do, and others reference a cattle plague, both of which may have contributed to the damage done to agriculture. but again, we know very little of this period of time. Another factor would have been too much autonomy for vassal states. When Axum conquered its surrounding lands, it relied on a modified feudal system. So after tribal leaders pledged allegiance, they were left to their own devices for the most part. And this probably wasn't the greatest idea, as these tribal leaders eventually began to launch rebellions. Though details are somewhat scarce, there are several brief mentions of tribes like the Beja and Agao causing unrest on the outskirts of Axum, which, if true, would have meant that Axum would have been cut off from valuable trade routes and resources. The Hadith also makes a brief reference to several rebellions and several ruined cities and evidence of them being burnt down. Similarly, an inscription on a pedestal at the city of Axum shows that a man called Hatsani Daniel seized power over an Axumite king towards the end of Axum's existence, though whether he retained this power is unknown. Okay, and the next one is trade issues. In addition to possible loss of trade because of rebellions, Axum's marine trade routes also seem to have been blocked by pirates, Arab Muslims, and the Persian Empire, though little is known about the specifics. Furthermore, with Persian incursions into Arabia as Jerusalem and Alexandria fell to the Persians in 614 to 619, trade with the Mediterranean and Arabia and further east towards India and China would have decayed or even been entirely blocked. Axum relied heavily on imported goods, and this would have been devastating. There's also evidence that Axum may have had less to trade in general due to decreasing ivory and gold supplies, though this is mostly speculation. So we can see how all of these things tie together. So too much autonomy for the border tributary states, climate change, overextending with Caleb, and trade issues resulting, and then you get a gradual decline of the Axumite Empire. There is also, some people talk about the plague of Justinian in roughly the 500s and how that would have contributed. I'm not super, into that idea. I don't think one plague is going to destroy a whole empire. Okay, so do you have anything to add to that, Uncle?
No, you hit the nail on the head, right? As many say, with the Nugus Caleb entering Yemen, some people call it the swan song of the Axumite Empire, meaning it overexpended itself by going there and created the downward spiral of the Axumite Empire. Then, of course, you have the erosion of the land. And as you mentioned, the capital might have been abandoned somewhere around this time. Some have speculated it may have moved east towards places like Wu'uro or Endatha. But again, we still don't know. I also like to highlight Indamahoni as being a place, as the translation has been traditionally translated as Indamekwanint. So you get many famous people, even people like Suhail Mikhail, trace their ancestry to the Asifaris, going to Indamahoni, and many others as well. Even with the Hatsani Daniel and many other figures that will come up later on are from these areas. So it may point to the possible location of the Kubar town.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Here, answer. If anyone has a question, put the question in the question box, and we'll answer it later. We'll have a little question and answer period. I have a question for you. I've seen mentions of Resi Faris, the Great, many, many times, but I can't find even a paragraph about him. So what can you tell us what you know about him?
So what I do know about him is he's traditionally known as Ra'asi Faris the Great. He is born and raised in an area called Bora Salwa, which is just east of the Ago region, and west of places like Addashuhu, Maicho, so on and so forth, south of Samra. All I can really find out is that, one, he's obviously a powerful warlord, and two, he is the ancestor of Suhail Mikhail. Of course, having many kids, people like Shum Walda Garima, even I think his grandson was Dejjat Hiskias, the father of Suhail Mikhail, and a few other people may lay the claim. But again, like you said, you can't even find as much as a paragraph on it.
Okay, so I was hoping you knew more. So
yeah, no, I've tried. Trust me, I've went to the location specifically trying to find it out.
You went physically?
Yeah, physically. I went to Indamakhoni. I went to places like Addashuhu, Adalla. Yeah, Bora Siloa. Of course, Bora Siloa is actually two areas, sorry. So there's Bora and then there's Siloa.
Okay.
So Siloa is more famous than Bora, but traditionally they're known as the same, just like places like Medawai Zana, as
Mm-hmm.
Medawai is one area, Zana is another.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like I said, only traditional stories, and even at that, very few.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Okay. Now we're going to move on to a topic I really enjoy talking about. So, what is said to be the actual, death knell of the Axumite Empire, Yodit Gudit.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have some stuff that's a little bit not traditional, but why don't you tell us what
Mhm.
who Yodit Gudit is?
Okay, so in the tradition, she is said to be half Adwa, half Aksum in
Okay.
background.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe there was a diakon of St. Mary's Church in Aksum,
Mm-hmm.
who was interested in the girl, wanted to marry her,
Mm-hmm.
and she had the royal blood. So
Mm-hmm.
she goes, "Oh, I'm of the aristocratic family. If you want to marry me, you have to present some kind of gift as
Mm-hmm.
dowry of sorts." So she wanted shoes. So he goes to the curtain of the Saint Mary, the Mentolite, and
Mm-hmm.
rips the curtain, which is made out of gold, and
Mm-hmm.
makes a shoe out of it. Presents it to the girl, and the priest of Aksum come and say, "Who ripped the Mentolite, which is the dividing line between the Holy of Holies and the place where the congregation sits." And once everything is expressed that, oh, the diakon came, ripped it, and made the shoe, she was blamed for it. So she was persecuted. I think her left breast was cut off, and she ran
Mm-hmm.
to either Egypt or someplace in Eritrea.
Mm-hmm.
And she marries a warlord of sorts, and they come, and of course everything happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a Jewish, I think it was a Jewish warlord. So it could be
Mm-hmm.
Sudan, could be Egypt, could be in Eritrea. I'm not too sure.
Mm-hmm.
So the traditional stories go something like that. Another story, using another account, is that there were Jews in Aksum that were banished towards the west
Mm-hmm.
in around the third or fourth century during Izana, and they brought the uprising. So places like in Walkait or within Sudan itself came and took over. There's another account as such.
Okay.
Mhm.
So it was the first one you said, is that like the church account or what,
Yeah,
or is that just a,
it's a folk tale actually. It's
okay.
somewhat like priests will say this if
Mm-hmm.
you go to some of the churches, but it's like from place to
It's
place they have different things.
it's interesting that that was the first version you told me because I didn't hear about that one until I read it from a document that I'm gonna start
Hmm.
referencing. So that's interesting. That's the first one you talk about. So I'm gonna sort of skim through an article because I'm not sure like how much time do we have? We probably have like maybe like a half hour left, and I don't want to take up too much time. I want to leave some time for questions. Again, everybody, if you have questions, put them in the question box and we'll answer them. So this is a study, essentially, 34 pages. It's not really that long, done by a guy named Knud Taga Anderson for the University of Cambridge, where he talks about the Queen of the Habesha in Ethiopian history, tradition, and chronology. So he analyzes all the different myths, the dates, blah blah blah. I'm gonna like not go through everything because we don't have
Hmm.
all the time in the world, and it might just confuse people. But okay, so we have it's well known from Ethiopian tradition that Ethiopia was once ruled by a queen called Gudit, Yodit, Isat, or Gawa, with both positive and negative connotations. So on the one hand, she was a beautiful woman of the Ethiopian royal family, much like the Queen of Sheba. That's why I found it interesting that you said that because I didn't know that version that she was part of the Axumite royal family until I read it here. And you're the first person I've heard say that.
Hmm.
Everything else I only heard the negative stuff. She destroyed
Yeah.
everything. On the other hand, she was a despicable prostitute who, at the time of political weakness, killed the Axumite king, captured the throne, and as a cruel ruler, destroyed Axum. Another tradition deals with Mesebewerk, the daughter of the last Axumite king Dilnaad.
Hmm.
Against her father's will, Mesebewerk married a high-ranking military official called Mera Tekla Haymanot from the
Marataklayamano.
province of Mara. Okay, Mara Tekla Haymanot. I'm reading like a Ferengi's transliteration.
Yeah,
So
yeah, sorry.
from the from the province of Lasta, and together they took over the Ethiopian throne from her father, and founded the so-called Zagwe dynasty, which in later Amharic tradition became the object of contempt because its kings did not belong to the so-called Solomonic dynasty. In spite of the different names and other variations in the story, there can be no doubt that the two traditions deal with the same woman and the same reality, namely that a strong female ruler rose to power in Axum, ended Axumite rule, and made way for the Zagwe dynasty, which became despised in posterity. Okay, so now we're going to move down. Okay, so there's some evidence for her in real life. So we know she was a real person. Just summarized, Danny. I know that was the summary, Febu. I'm sorry. I'm trying to. I know. This is. Yeah. So we have two pieces of evidence that tell us for sure that she was a real woman. An Arab scholar called Ibn Hakul wrote about her at the same time. So he's contemporaneous, meaning he lived at the same time as her. And another one is History of the Patriarchs of the Egyptian Church, which has a primary document from Alexandria in the church that is from that time period, talking about a woman who ruled in Ethiopia or in Axum at the time. Okay, so the document from Ibn Hakul, the Arab, says that as regards Abyssinia, for many years it has had a woman as its ruler. It is she who killed the king of Abyssinia, who is known under the title of Hadani or Hatsani, and she continues this day to dominate her own country and the neighboring regions of the land to the Hatsani in the west of Abyssinia. It is a vast, limitless country rendered difficult of access by deserts and wastes. So that tells us we know that someone who lived at that time was writing about this woman who ruled, so we know she was real. Again, I'll summarize the one from the church in Alexandria. At that point in time, there was some shenanigans going on with the metropolitan. I don't know, what's the word in our language for the metropolitan? You know what I'm talking about, right? The person,
yeah,
the abun. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
An abun hadn't been sent for some time, something like 30 years.
Yeah.
So the king who ruled after Yodit was asking for a new abun to be sent, saying, we've returned to God and all this. So we know, and also that for 30 years prior, that a woman had ruled Axum. So we know Yodit is real. I'm going to try and go through this. I'll just give the conclusions. Essentially, what this guy manages to do with all the evidence is show us that the stories that are told about Yodit were meant to demonize her by the incoming next rulers from Showa and delegitimize her. And so the evidence shows, I can send you this later, Uncle, this article, it's amazing. Yeah. The evidence shows that she was almost certainly an Axumite princess, descended from the royal line, like you said in the story. She probably married Maratakla Haimanot, who was from Lasta and Agao. Was she killed in Axum? I don't think so. If you look at the time period of how long she ruled actually, I think, 40 years from what we know. So she was probably really old when she died. She probably died of old age. But we know she ruled for roughly 40-ish years, and that the history around her has been changed to create a sort of, ideology that fits the new, rulers. So, and we also know that the Zagwe dynasty was descended from her. The evidence also shows that Dilnaad, who's said to be in some accounts the last ruler of Axum, was probably her son. And that, have you heard of Ambasawaddam?
Ambasawaddam, yeah. I think the father of Dilnaad, yeah?
Well, that's the thing. In this document, it shows he was probably a descendant of Dilnaad, not the father. And that certain kings who were Zagwe kings who came later were they were changed as being Axumite kings because they were Christians who did good things and they didn't want to slander their names. So that's another thing he shows, is that the kings list that they have, there's different versions, some of them are very clearly altered for political purposes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we also see that in the Kabra Negast,
Mm-hmm.
where it says at some point that it says something like, "And a woman shall never rule Ethiopia again." So it's very obvious
Yeah.
statement who they're talking about. Who wifed her?
Mm-hmm.
Who wifed her? Mara Tekla Haimanot from
Mm-hmm.
Lasta is the most likely. We see him mentioned many, many times. We also know if he's from Lasta, that means he was in Agao. And we know there's a connection between the Zagwe dynasty and and all the stuff that happened at that time. We also do know that things moved further east, exactly as you said.
Mm-hmm.
We also see there's another paper I read that shows rock-hewn churches in Tigray. So throughout eastern Tigray, and I think other places, there are rock-hewn churches. Around the time when King Lalibela created, what's the name of the big famous one in Lalibela?
Kudus Gorgis.
Kadus Gorgis and the other ones, because there's other ones,
Yeah,
correct?
there's Liban, Abba Libanos, Kudus Mercorios. There's
Hmm.
like 11 of them. Emmanuel. Yeah.
Around the time those are made, rock-hewn churches stop being made in Tigray
Mm-hmm.
for a period of about 100 to 200 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then, after the Zagwe dynasty falls, we see rock-hewn churches being made again in Tigray.
Mm-hmm.
So it's most likely that the builders for those churches came directly from Tigray. Um, basically, what I'm trying to say here, I'm not sure if I'm being clear, is that we know that the Yodit was likely an Axumite princess. Also, the evidence shows that she was probably a perfectly fine ruler, that people liked her. It's possible that Axum re-expanded for a bit under her rule. She ruled for 40 years, so it must have been somewhat peaceful. Um, we also know that Dilnaod probably was her son and not the actual um, the person that she killed, because that's a story that gets. There's lots of different versions of the story. It gets a little bit
Mm-hmm.
confusing. Dilnaod was probably son. The Zagwe dynasty descended from probably this Axumite princess, and the next dynasty, the Showan dynasty, didn't like that, and obviously they had to legitimize their rule. So they created these stories as a way of slandering the previous dynasty and Yodit, and then legitimizing themselves. So a good analogy I like to use is before Germany became a unified country in Europe in roughly the 1800s, there was a state that was basically the German state called the Holy Roman Empire, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The Holy Roman Empire considered itself a successor state to the Roman Empire, right? But it was basically just a German country with a name called the Holy Roman Empire. And there was a French philosopher, I think it was Voltaire, who said that the
Voltaire.
Holy Roman Empire is neither holy nor Roman nor an empire, right? So the relationship between the Showan dynasty, the Zagwe dynasty, and the Axumites is very, very interesting. Do you have any commentary, any clarification?
Yeah, a few things is now that you mentioned it, even the name Dil Naod is not Giz or Tigrinya. So
Oh,
that definitely contains, so the word Dil
mm-hmm.
it means victory. It's in Amharic and possibly in Ago as well.
Okay.
So it's a possibility that well, I wouldn't say evidence for it, but I mean circumstantially it can prove.
It makes more sense
Yeah.
that if he has an Agawish kind of name, that
Hmm.
he would be the descendant of her. Yeah.
Exactly.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, and also with the story of Ga'awa,
Mm-hmm.
some also put it to again her being in this place called Ndamukhoni, or not too
Mm-hmm.
far from there. So why I say that and why that's funny is because Ndamukhoni borders Wag Khamra.
Mm-hmm.
Wag Khamra meaning Lasta, Lalibela, and that area, which was traditionally Ago speaking.
Mm-hmm.
So that definitely shows another relationship between the two. And then again, also later on, we'll see the descendants of Marata Klaimanot go all the way down to Deka Shum Agana. So Shum Agana Waldu, Shum Agana Kumalit. They claim this descendancy from Marata Klaimanot, which is
Oh, the
interesting.
Shumagame does.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
okay.
Suagadis, Waldu, Shum Kumalit, like their lineage or their claim to fame
Mm-hmm.
is through Marata Klaimanot. And why that's interesting is that these are two Cushitic speaking people, meaning the
Yeah.
Agho speaking and Saho speaking. So that's definitely interesting there. But as you mentioned already, the whole situation between Mara Tekla Haymanot, Dil Naod, and Ambasawadin is very vague and
Hmm.
it's not definitive. So we don't really know exactly what it is. But again, like you hit it on the nail.
Yeah, there's a few questions here. So let's see. So all these stories about her destroying Axum is fake news. Probably, again, we don't know, but it's definitely propaganda. So that's something to be keep in mind that all these stories being told served a purpose. Because then, if she's a horrible person who destroyed Axum and destroyed all this stuff, then we know that all her descendants are horrible people and illegitimate. Is there a specific book to read on Yodit you guys recommend? I don't think there's any books. This article is great. I don't think I can link it, but I can give you guys the title. So it's The Queen of the Habesha in Ethiopian History, Tradition, and Chronology. And I'll try and write that down later.
And
Tell us
please
how much
send it to me as well.
I will send that to you. Tell us how much that she destroyed. We don't know. Again, that's similar to the previous question. We don't know. Could have been nothing. She reigned for 40 years, which means, she was around for a long time. I doubt she would go around destroying a kingdom that she ruled for 40 years. It doesn't quite make sense, right? Um, Yodit sounds like Pharaoh Hatshepsut in Egypt. Interesting. I will put it in the Discord. No, it's not in the Discord. I will put it in the Discord. Okay. So if anyone has any questions, we're basically sort of like done because I didn't want to read a 34-page paper and bore you guys. But if you have any questions, put them in the question box. Is there anything you want to talk about or anything you want to say? Was she Muslim? I don't think so. I don't think so. I know why you're asking it. There's a version of that story where um, she is Muslim. There's also an account that calls her Bani al Hamiwaya or something like that.
Yes, from Sudan. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that this guy, he has I wish I could find it. There's a point where he talks about that and how it might be a mistranslation of actually something is in Tigray and it gets mixed up.
Mhm.
But unlikely that she's Muslim. Probably an Axumite.
But there's more of an account of her being Jewish.
Yes,
The
that I've
traditional
heard that a
account.
lot.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And that's very interesting. We can talk about this for now. The relationship between Agos, Jews, and the Beta Israel. There's a
Hmm.
lot going on there.
Hmm.
Um, Sorry, I'll interrupt myself quick. Was there any guys put the questions in the question box? It's easier to for me to come back to them later. Was there any form of currency that was printed with her face just like her predecessors? No, because she ruled roughly 930 AD-ish to 970-ish, and coins stopped being printed. I don't remember the exact date. I have it here. Roughly, I think 500, 600-ish. No, not 500, 600-ish. So coins stopped being used roughly 300-ish years before she was ruling. But yeah, Agos, Jews, Beta Israel. Something a lot of people don't realize is the Beta Israel, before they spoke Amharic and Tigrinya, in the past 100 years, they actually spoke Aga languages. Um, and what else? What was I going to say? So there does seem to be like a historic relationship between those three groups. It's also important to know, though, that when people use the term Jewish in many historical records in Tigray and Ethiopia, sometimes it meant non-believer.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, it didn't necessarily always mean that person is a Jew. Sometimes it just meant this person is a non-believer. So it could be that they meant she's an actual Jew. Could be it just meant she was like a non-believer. But it is interesting to note that that there's a relationship between she's married to an Ago. She founded the Zagwe dynasty. We know that the Beta Israel spoke Agao languages, and they're
Hmm.
said to be Jews. So that's all very interesting. Is there anything you have to add?
That's definitely it. Um, yeah.
Oh yeah, okay. So someone else asks, isn't one of the rumors that she broke one of the Axum's Hawaltis? Yeah, I read that in this. Again, seems unlikely. I think the account is she broke it with an iron axe. Seems tough, you know.
Yeah, I think the more attested account is that the 33-foot long I think it's 33 feet or 33 meters.
Meters, I
Yeah,
think.
meters.
No?
Sorry, yeah, meters.
Yeah.
Yeah, my
Hmm.
sense of yeah, but yeah, 33-meter Hawati fell once it was erected.
Yeah, that's what I
So
heard. Yeah,
I think that would be more of the understandable situation
yeah.
or provable.
Someone asks Beta Israel, they never been into Tigray?
No, they definitely were. They definitely were.
Okay. What
You
areas?
could
I don't know.
so with the accounts during Izana or Abraha Natuha,
Hmm.
the Jews that revolted at the time were banished to the west. So anywhere within Aksum's countryside towards Shara, there's like grave sites in Shara
Hmm.
that you can find. Askaret Zambala, which is in Dabaguna,
Hmm.
Shararo, Walqait, Adaramat, Humara, Sagada, Tsalamti, Armachoho. Of course, when getting into Gondar, you'll see places like Kwara, Dambia.
Hmm.
Um, Let me see. I want to say Abdrafit, and a few other places as well that I can't really
Hmm.
think of off the top of my head. But they had their kingdom in that area, meaning the Simian area or like anywhere between like Sheda and Sudan, anything in
Hmm.
between was like this Gideon Empire. So
Okay.
that's where they were centered.
Okay. I heard she killed lots of priests. I heard she lit the city on fire.
Mhm,
Again, I don't know. I don't like. I think
mhm,
it doesn't make sense to me that someone would take over a kingdom and then just destroy everything. I'm of the belief personally, and again, this is just a theory based off of what this guy wrote, that it seems most likely that she was an Axumite princess. She ruled really, really well because it shows in this article that I'm talking about that in earlier accounts she's written about in a very, very positive manner. They talk about her as a wonderful queen, and then we can see later on things get more and more negative. Um, there's also an interesting little thing here, a little tidbit in here, where it talks about how when they finally do get a new Abuna, the Abuna comes and he goes to exterminate the cult of the snake near Lake Hike. And we spoke about that. I'm
yeah,
always
yeah,
on,
yeah.
know. So if
The snake.
you guys gotta in the audience, the people who've been here since episode 1 and 2, you gotta
Mm,
know the significance of the cult of the snake, and then
mm,
the land of Punt and all that. Um, it's the misogyny. Yeah, why not? We do see in early, like, so we talked about this. I think in the ancient times of the kingdom of Diamat, we see that the kings of that kingdom wouldn't just list their male ancestors; they would also list their female ancestors. So they would say, I am the son of this person who's my father and this person who's my mother, which is very rare. So that meant the maternal line was also important. We also, I forget again, I had to read this and take some notes really quickly, but there is some evidence that shows that a woman ruling in Aksum wasn't maybe that big of a deal. But afterwards, we see with the Showan dynasty that changes, and it's a woman can never rule again. It can only go through the male line, and so on and so forth. So yeah, misogyny could have definitely played a role. Um, what was I going to say? Something about. Oh, okay. So what period did the Nine Saints come into?
mhm. So the Nine Saints, the date is traditionally dated as 480 AD.
Okay,
So fifth century, and they were active up until the mid sixth century.
okay. And where did the Nine Saints come from?
So they predominantly came from Syria.
Hmm.
Asia Minor, Syria, as west as probably Constantinople, which
Hmm.
is in present day Turkey. But
Hmm.
again, they are of Syrian origin. How we know this is the use of the title Mar, which is
Hmm.
Syrian, not English, and it would mean master or lord.
Hmm.
Which is just generally a title given to like honorary figures like bishops, saints, and the
Hmm.
such. So Yeah, so they came from essentially from Syria and the Syrian-speaking areas, and came to Aksum first. Spent time
Hmm.
in Aksum, maybe 10 to 20 years, and then shifted towards places like Arwa, um, like Dabagarima, Jabra Madara, War'i Lakha, Ahasa'a, uh, Sawa Damo, Hausian, even as far south as Maicho.
Okay. Um, Here's a question I have for you. Why are so many churches in parts of Tigray in places that are very difficult to get to? Is there a
Yeah,
reason
that's
for that?
yeah. So I mean, well, a lot of these churches were actually monasteries.
Okay,
So
so these are okay.
yeah, so as monasteries, they made it difficult because they wanted to remove themselves from the world or from
Okay.
society. So they chose the toughest of terrains, the hardest living conditions, just because they would be that ascetical.
Hmm.
So living comfortably is something against monasticism. So they
Hmm.
look at comfort as something, I guess, opposing to the monastic life.
Okay.
So that's how
Okay.
it came to be.
So it's mostly monasteries that are in the difficult places.
Yeah,
Okay. Because they talk about the rock-hewn churches in Tigray, and then you see them
yeah,
going up
yeah.
like some mountain or like a goat, and then
Mm,
it's just like it's in the middle of like a cliff, and then there's just like
mm.
a window, and you're like, what?
Yeah,
What are these people do?
yeah.
Okay.
Especially places like example in Dabba Yohani in Tambien, Gara
Mhm.
Alta with Aoni Ma'ata,
Mhm.
um, Debre Damo and Dabba Salama. And another thing is that the going to the church is showing like the spiritual life, which is something hard to obtain or something that is definitely difficult, right? So the Christian is not to be living in comfort, but to continuously be renewing themselves and leaving societal norms and kind of pushing for this struggled life towards God. You're struggling. You're leaving the more comfortable worldly things, the pleasurable things for
Mhm.
the heavenly things. So that level of difficulty is kind of represented in the journey too. And then again, the churches being on top of these cliffs or mountains kind of show the elevation of the spiritual life versus the worldly life. So going to the church, you're elevating towards God. So ta'arga hada samai,
Oh, okay.
as comments here.
Mhm. Someone also said it's to stay away, to stay hidden away from enemies. Is that?
And
Mhm.
that's definitely another one. A lot of monasteries were also jails at the same time.
Oh.
So people would be jailed in monasteries. And
Mhm.
so they would be able to hide things. Like example, Debre Damo is one of the only places not to be touched by people like Ahmed Grant.
Mhm.
Also the Holy not Holy Family, sorry, the royal family hid in Debre Damo during certain
Okay.
fights. So again, with the claim with the Yorit Gurit, the one where she's presented as this warrior queen,
Mhm.
shows the royal family actually hiding in Debre Damo.
Mhm.
So that's another claim as well.
Okay. Um, Here's another question. I love asking questions like this. How did like one time I asked my grandma, how did people sleep back in the day before, the modern firash?
Aha.
She told me they would make like a skin
Yeah.
from they'd get the skin of an animal and then they'd sew it together and they'd fill it with like soft stuff
Hmm.
and then that's how they would sleep.
Yeah.
So this is my question. So if say there's a hard to get to monastery, how do the monks there get food and supplies?
Yeah. So they would actually carry it as they climb,
Oh, okay.
and they would tie it around themselves, and then they would have it passed on from person to person.
Mhm.
With places like Devra Damo, they actually have rope, again made out of skin, that they
Mhm.
would tie things with and then pull up. So,
Okay.
like example, the bed that you mentioned now, I had the opportunity and the blessing to actually sleep on it for a year while
Okay.
in a Bagarima monastery,
Mhm.
and these are things that the monks would make traditionally by hand, right?
Mhm.
A lot of the monks are not just spiritual people, but they're also very handy. So a
Mhm.
lot of handcrafts, they call it irit abab, which is
Mhm.
anything you do by hand, making crosses, woodwork, firework, metalwork, so on and
Mhm.
so forth, would be done by a lot of the monks, if not by communities specifically made for that.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Um, I had another question. Uh, I totally forgot because I was reading the comments.
Yeah.
Um, oh, what was the to bring it back to the nine saints? What was the legacy of the nine saints in terms of the church?
So every monastery traces its spiritual lineage to the nine saints, specifically Awan Aragawi. So there's a statement
Okay,
in Giz. زي يتولى ام Aragawi حساوي أبوته, which is
okay,
he who says that he's not born of Awan Aragawi is a liar, because
okay.
because every monastery descends from this order, and Awan Aragawi actually.
Specifically from him, not from any of the other saints?
No, no, specifically from him. Some of the other
Okay,
saints are possible, but even at that, amongst the nine saints, Awan Aragawi was the first to become a
okay.
monk.
Hmm.
Awan Garimao is the first saint to be consecrated a monk in Ethiopia.
Hmm.
There are monks that have came to Ethiopia prior to the nine saints, but they did not establish the monasteries. With
Okay.
they call it Hadinat, which is basically the monks that live together. So in monasticism, there's about two or three divisions. There's monks that live together as communities, and then there's ones that live separately, like Bahatawis. So
Hmm.
Bahatawis are more informal, and then the Hadinat system is a formal monastery. So there were monasteries using the Bahatinat system, which is just individual monks, just or um, how would
Like
I
a
put it?
hermit almost?
Yes, hermits, yes. So there'd
Okay.
be hermits, but there wouldn't be monks per se.
Hmm.
So the Nine Saints actually brought that system to Ethiopia, and it was expounded and brought and like pretty much put everywhere else. So important saints like Auna Takla Hamanot has his lineage from Devra Dammo, which is Auna Argawi.
Hmm.
Other saints like, for example, Yesus Ma'a
Hmm.
from Devra Dammo, Abba Yohani, Devra Dammo, Auna Samuel by lineage Devra Dammo, Auna Medhani Exi, so on and so forth. So
Okay, so do monks like, does a monk feel like they have like, in how in our culture we have like your dad puts you on his lap and he tells you you're so and then and you've got all your dads and your dads
yeah,
and dads dads. Do
yeah.
you, and that's your lineage? Does a monk have a monk's lineage? Like you have a father, a monk's father, and so on and so forth?
Yes, exactly. They have this system. And so example, Awana Tekla Hamanot, it said that he is the seventh generational son of Awana Aragawi. So counting his generation, he was consecrated a monk by Abba Yohani, Abba Yohani of
Hmm.
Debre Damo. And Abba Yohani is sixth from Awana Aragawi, meaning he had an abbot who had an abbot who had an abbot, which goes back to Abba Aragawi.
Okay. And
And
the abbot is the head of a monastery.
exactly, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so wow. And did the nine saints all come at the same time or did they come at separate times?
Eight of them came together. Abba Garima came last.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's another question. Why did the nine saints come to Aksu?
So during the yeah, that's a good question, and a lot of people don't know this, but there was an issue in the church. So
Hmm.
the way Christianity was set was that, of course, it was a faith started by the apostles and of course Christ,
Hmm.
and up it was kind of informal up until the fourth century, in which we had the first ecumenical council, the Council of Nicaea. Anytime there's like a heresy going on in the church, the bishops would congregate together, but the ecumenical council would be the bishops from the whole Christian world. So in the fourth ecumenical council in 451, which is the Council of Chalcedon, which was the essentially the line in which we say that the Oriental Orthodox, which is our church, the Egyptians and the Syrians, Indians and Armenians, and obviously the Urchins, split from the Eastern Orthodox, which is the Greek, the Catholics, of course, at the time, and as well as Russians. And it was due to the nature of Christ. How did we understand Christ? Was he fully God, fully man? At what level was these two natures connected? Or they mixed? These were the topics. So with that debate and with that separation of the church, there was persecutions in Europe, going as far east as, of course, Persia even. So with these persecutions, they came to Ethiopia, as Ethiopia was this land of very welcoming people. So they came seeking help, and the king of Aksum obviously took them in, protected them. They stayed, and the way they paid back the king was by translating books. So they, of course, staying in Aksum for 10 to 20 years, learn Ge'ez, learn the culture, learn the society, and then that's when you get the translation of a lot of books, like the Bible.
Hmm.
As many say, the first seven languages that the Bible was translated into directly from its original Greek, the New Testament, Ge'ez is one of them. So we see a lot of translations starting from Abba Salama, but predominantly we understand it through the nine saints. And the most important one we have is the Garima Gospels, written by Saint Awanagarima.
Okay, awesome. Someone wants to know, does Abuna Aragawi, did he have any kids?
Spiritually, yes. Physically, no.
But no, okay. I assumed that was the answer.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so we have 10 minutes left. We have a few questions. Fabu said, wait, where did the saints even come from? I think you said earlier they mostly came from Syria.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. Do you know what this means? These are just
Mhm.
places. Matama Yohannes, Abderafi,
Yeah.
Abrahajira.
Yeah, these are in present day Amhara region, which
Mm-hmm.
border the western Tigray. So if you go south of Tagada or Tsalamti, you get,
Mm-hmm.
as I mentioned earlier, I don't know if you remember, there's places like Abderrafit, which is towards the
Mm-hmm.
west bordering Sudan. You have Abrahajira, which is just east of there. Metma Yohannes, which is south
Mm-hmm.
of Abderrafit. And Metma Yohannes is titled Metma Yohannes because of At Yohannes and him
Mm-hmm.
dying there.
Okay.
It's traditionally said, I mean, this is obviously up for debate depending on who you ask. These
Mm-hmm.
are Tigrinya speaking areas.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Abderrafit sounds Arabic, but
Yeah.
Abrahajara, I mean, can be looked at differently, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so those are areas in present day Semen Gondar.
Okay.
Um, yeah, but we'll get into that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So after you guys are done discussing the Axumite Empire, will you continue to talk about the history of Ethiopia, specifically Tigray, up to current events? Yeah, that's the goal. Is we're gonna go ideally up to like Johannes, and then maybe we can jump back and go into more detail on specific times. Because like this was very, very general. Like I have a book that I still haven't read. I've maybe read like 20 pages. That's just about the relationship between the Byzantine Empire, so the Eastern Roman Empire, and the Axumite Empire in a period of 12 years where they tried to take over an island between Arabia and the Horn of Africa so that they can
Sokotri.
control the spice trade. Exactly,
Yes,
Sokotri.
yes, yeah,
It's just about that, like
yeah.
all this communications they had. So, like, our history is so rich. We'll get there. Don't worry. Um, Sion wants to know, does all Orthodox don't believe the same thing? Correct me if I'm wrong, but we're called Oriental Orthodox,
Yes.
and then there's others that are Eastern Orthodox, which would be like Greece, Russia, whatever. And
Yeah.
I think the differences are very, very minute.
Very minute, very.
Okay.
Uh,
Um, so did you have something else to add, or?
yeah, no, I was just gonna say, dogmatically, the Oriental Orthodox are the same.
Mm-hmm.
We have a few differences doctrinally amongst each other. So, like example topics like Saint Mary and also
Mm-hmm.
the communion may be different. Specifically with the Armenians with communion and with Saint Mary, the Ethiopian Church, and by extension, obviously the Eritrean Church, have a teaching a little similar to Catholicism or to
Okay.
Islam.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, amongst the scholars of the Tewahedo Church, I mean, there are debates. But amongst with the again with the Eastern Orthodox, like you said, is very minute. We essentially believe the same thing,
Okay.
essentially.
Um, when I visited Axum, I learned how Tigrayans may have been the first people to create and implement a ruler to measure. Can you talk about this? Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah. So there's a tomb of Nugus Romhai, and
Okay.
right beside the tomb, there's a traditional ruler cut in stone. So measurements were obviously precise. I mean, with the old world, we don't really know the tools and things that they've used, like how they built the Hawati. We really don't know. So
Hmm.
and like if you see the Hawati, it's very precise. So what tools they were using, we don't really know. What like measurements. I mean, we do see, like example, the traditional ruler, that I like to call it. So I mean, It's there, but we don't really know, or we don't really
Yeah.
understand it, at least.
Yeah, it's crazy. The Howlty is like they're made from a single stone. That's what's crazy about them. People don't realize it's one piece of stone, and some of them are huge. They're massive. So I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it makes sense to me that the biggest one fell. Something
Mm-hmm.
happened.
Yeah.
But if you look at the other ones, I don't know how much they weigh, but they probably weigh like a few hundred tons. And
Just
imagine, never
one.
mind constructing it, but attempting to lift it and not have it fall over. That's all, an amazing sort of feat of construction.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I think we're done for now. I think Instagram is going to shut us down in a few minutes, so we might as well finish here. Um, is it true they're granite? I don't know.
I'm not too sure.
Some sort of stone. I don't know. I'm not a
Yeah.
geologist. They're made out of some sort of one piece of stone, though. They're made out of one giant piece. That's the thing. They're not made from several pieces stacked on upon each other. And they're funerary. They're funerary stelae, meaning they're meant to sort of like commemorate a dead important person. And I think they're also supposed to look like false houses,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they have doors and windows and stuff like that. They could be granite, Fabu, I'm not sure. But yeah, we're done for today. So after this, I don't know how much of the Zagwa period we'll be doing. I don't think there's that much info, but we'll try and
Mm-hmm.
touch on
Yeah.
it. And then we'll probably move on to there's very fun stuff in the 13th, 14th century with rebellions and stuff like that. And so we'll talk about that next one. So 2 weeks from now. Thank you everybody for showing up. You've been wonderful. Thank you, Uncle, for being here and for helping me out.
No
Yeah.
problem.
Hopefully we'll see you guys next time. Bye.
All right.